Back. Greetings, everyone. This is Lucian Vâlsan broadcasting from Berlad, let's say, from the very far east of Romania, just 20 kilometers away from the border with the former Soviet Union. As always, alongside with me is Herr Jon Gunnarsson broadcasting from Deutschland, and our producer James Huff making sure everything works just fine, broadcasting from the States. Greetings, Mr. Gunnarsson.
Good evening. It's good to be back.
Yeah, it's good to be back too, although from a very weird setup. I haven't been broadcasting in this format for quite some time. I think only once since I've been doing this show for the last almost actually more than 3.5 years. Amazing. Yeah. So, the weather here has been very polite with me in the last 2 days. Almost +9 degrees in Celsius during the night, plus 15 during the daytime. Fantastic. This used to be the coldest area of the country during the winter. So someone did make the global warming great again. How about on your end?
Well, that's pretty amazing. On mine, it's been quite cold. It's like it's not like extremely cold, but it's like -5 degrees, that sort of thing, and it's annoying. I want it to be spring again.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward for the warmer seasons because I'm just not a big fan of cold. That's why I set up my trip to Sweden in June and not in December. So yeah, all right. We have plenty of news because we're supposed to cover 2 weeks because we've been missing last week, basically because of me, because I set up my flight just on Friday. So there's that. So yeah, let's dive into them because there's plenty of them. The first one is on you.
Okay, the first one is coming to us from Spain, from qz.com. Spain is getting rid of street names named after fascist leaders, dedicating them to women instead. Though Francisco Franco's totalitarian Spanish regime was toppled nearly 40 years ago, its legacy is still present in the country. Walk through the cities of Spain, and you're likely to find streets named after regime members like General José Milán Astray, Attorney General Adolfo Muñoz Alonso, Minister José Enrique Valera, and many more. But not for long. In February, the government, applying a 2007 law that promised to get rid of the marks of autocratic heritage in public spaces, announced it would retire those street names. Now, cities around the country are renaming them after women, answering the complaint that about 90% of streets in Spain's cities are named after men, and those honoring women usually reference saints. Jeanette Sadiq Khan, former New York City Transport Commissioner, once famously said, "If you can change the street, you can change the world." If she's right, Spain is on its way to a metaphorical revolution. Since 2005, the city of Córdoba has enforced a mandate that half of the new streets be named after women. In Barcelona, the total number of streets named after women went from 7% in 1996 to 27.7% in 2010. To further correct the imbalance, Valencia will now name 80% of its new streets after women, and Bilbao, Oviedo, and Cadiz plan to follow that example. Many of the streets have or will be named after Spanish women targeted during Franco's regime, including activists, revolutionaries, and civil rights fighters, such as Soledad Cazorla, the first public prosecutor to specialize in gender violence. Others will carry the names of women of remarkable talent from Spain and the rest of the world, who distinguish themselves in fields such as physics or equal rights movements. In the city of León, where the selection of name is made by popular vote, a recent group of possible street names included American civil rights activist Rosa Parks, Mexican painter Frida Kahlo, English novelist Jane Austen, and Spanish inventor Angela Ruiz Robel. Other countries should take note. The lack of streets named after women is far from just a Spanish problem. In Rome, for instance, only 3.5% of streets carry a woman's name. In 2015, a study of 7 world metropolis, London, Paris, San Francisco, Mumbai, New Delhi, and Chennai and Bangalore, found that only 27.5% of streets were named after women.
It's interesting that the percentage goes much higher once they include Indian cities such as Bangalore or New Delhi. We're noting this because we have a piece of news about India later in the show, where finally someone from the Indian authorities are punching back at the eternal false narrative that India is such a misogynistic and hateful place. It's not. India has a lot of problems, but not a misogyny problem. Now back to the streets. Why is this an issue? I mean, and besides, even more important, having many of the streets named after civil rights fighters such as Soledad Cazorla. Well, Soledad Cazorla is basically the Spanish version of Mary Kellett or Mary Koss, or all of those nasty women who genuinely believe that all men should be in concentration camps. Now, I'm sorry, but just like I don't want the street to be called Joseph Stalin, the same thing the same standard I would apply to individuals such as these ones. I mean, yeah, all right, we're purging the street names by that honor the Franco's regime, and instead replacing it with the different names that honor fascist regimes. Because again, Soledad Cazorla is the representative of the period in Spanish history, very recent period in Spanish history, called by the press to be the gender Stalinist period.
Yeah, like removing these fascist names, okay, fine, that whatever, but why is it some sort of injustice that not enough streets are named after women? It's just such a silly complaint. Because it's just a fact that most important people who have achieved great things are men.
Yeah,
that's just a fact, and so it shouldn't be surprising that most streets are named after men rather than women. Also, this 27.5% figure is actually rather high, because I mean, you have to keep in mind that not all streets are named after some person.
Yes,
a lot of streets are named after I don't know, after some
event.
like some event, or like the place they lead to, like maybe they're named after the next city, and because the idea is that if you take the street, you get to X city, so therefore we name the street after that city, something like that, or just named after some sort of abstract thing, or something that's just not a person. So 27.5% is actually not that bad.
Yeah, it is probably, I would say, disproportionately high. For instance, in the tiny town that I am living now, less than 30% of all streets are named after a person to begin with. Most of the streets are like the Spring Street, the December 1st Street, the Next City Street. So, most of them are there by events or personalities, in the sense that, like, the Presidency Streets or the City Hall Street or the Mayor's Street. So yeah, it is rather impressive in and of itself, and instead of whining about it, maybe they should celebrate it.
Yeah, and it is really, really interesting that once you include these cities in India and so on, then the number goes way up, and compared to all these Western metropolises, that is quite interesting.
And one more point to make is that Spain is still suffering from a rather impressive unemployment rate. Last time I checked, going somewhere around 27%. And when you go to youth unemployment rate, going a little bit over 50. I would expect that the city halls of these various Spanish metropolises would be far busier trying to tackle that, rather than try to tackle how many streets are named after women. Because a significant chunk of the unemployment figure is either because of the central government, which has been pushing for or at least maintaining many socialist policies dating all the way back to Franco, of those called job security, which essentially make hiring and firing extremely difficult, or because various mayors and local councils have introduced more and more taxes. For instance, in Barcelona, now they're taking a huge hit in terms of tourism because the new mayor, who is from Podemos and who is a radical feminist, has been pushing for all these kinds of new disdainful policies that make building new hotels very difficult, that make traveling by car in the city very difficult because, well, because she suddenly decided to emphasize bicycles. Somehow forgetting that Barcelona is not Amsterdam and bicycles aren't really a thing in the area. So, yeah, maybe they should be more concerned with that. I don't know, just saying.
Maybe the idea is that a young unemployed woman is wants to get out to look for a job, but then she sees the street named after a man, and she just gets discouraged and just goes home and.
Well, if that had been true, now thank goodness it's not true because women are not idiots, women are adults. But if that had been true, then I would definitely be there arguing that women don't deserve a job. If you're if you're discouraged by that much, then you probably don't deserve. You're part of the useless class. Now, thank goodness, women are not like that. Women are adults, women are humans, and with their own agency and intelligence. It's very interesting that we're making this case on this show, whereas the feminists are pushing more and more the radical notion that women are children.
Yep.
All right. Speaking of more or less imaginary women's rights, going to the next one from France, coming from The Veg. I made a video about this. France moves to ban misleading anti-abortion websites. Very misleading headline, speaking of which. But anyway, the French National Assembly this week moved to criminalize websites that spread quote-unquote misinformation about abortions and spread pro-life propaganda. The law, approved on Thursday, would punish offenders with up to 2 years in prison and a 30,000 euros fine. It will now move on to the Senate, The Guardian reports. Supporters say the bill would target sites that masquerade as neutral sources of information on abortion, but are in fact operated by advocacy groups that seek to manipulate and pressure women into not terminating pregnancies. The proposal has drawn criticism from right-wing politicians and Catholic organizations who say it infringes upon free speech. A law passed in 1993 makes it a crime to intimidate or pressure women into not having abortions. The law was originally passed to prevent anti-abortion activists from blocking access to abortion clinics following a wave of demonstrations during the 1980s. The proposal passed in the lower house this week would extend that law to websites that, quote, exert psychological or moral pressure on women, close quote, who are seeking information about abortions. 30 years ago, militants chained themselves to abortion clinics, Laurence Rossignol, the Socialist family minister, said during debate this week. Today, their successors are continuing this fight on the web. Rossignol has identified several sites such as ivg.net, sosgrossesse.net, and sosbebe.org as examples of misleading and manipulative platforms that seek to shame women into not terminating pregnancies. IVG.net portrays itself as a neutral platform to help women decide whether to have an abortion or not, promising complete information and offering a free helpline number. But as Le Monde reports, the site emphasizes the negative psychological and physical impacts that abortions can have on women and predominantly features harrowing testimonies. IVG.net also is the first result on Google France searches for IVG, which is the French acronym for abortions, ahead of the Health Ministry's official site for information. The proposed law has drawn criticism from conservative politicians and Catholic groups who see it as a violation of free speech. Last week, Catholic Archbishop Georges Portier published a letter to President François Hollande in which he said that the bill questions the foundations of our freedoms and especially the freedom of expression. Bruno Retailleau, a senator from the center-right Republican Party, said the bill would limit the information about alternatives to abortion. But Rossignol contested those arguments during debate this week, saying freedom of expression should not be confused with manipulating minds. The Senate will open the debate on the bill on December the 7th. They did start the debate. They still haven't got a resolution. So That's the news is still current. So yeah. Uh, Basically, I lurked since I made the video about this article. I lurked quite a lot into socialist circles, social media and whatnot, to see why they think the way they think. And apparently, in the general consensus amongst the base that pressured the Socialist Party to put this bill forward is that. Uh, Women's quote unquote right to abortion is so important that not only it has to be legal, but it has to be so important that other people's freedom of expression to contest it should be curbed at every step of the way. Basically, if a woman wants to have an abortion, it should be forbidden to try to convince her not to do it.
Yeah, we're not even talking about advocacy for making abortion illegal. They're just talking about advocacy that tries to convince women not to abort.
Yes.
Yes. That is just completely insane.
Well, it's French socialists. But no, it is interesting the way. I'm not a pro-lifer in the classical sense. I don't think abortion should be illegal, but I do think it should be a lot rarer than it happens today. And yes, I do think that women should at least know the risks. And this idea that abortion is somehow consequence-free and risk-free is just scientifically false. It's just not true. There are risks associated to abortion, just like to any other medical procedure.
Yeah, even if you're just talking about the risks to the woman having the abortion, even if you just completely disregard the child, and I do agree that a fetus or an embryo should not be treated the same as an actual child that is already born, but still it should have some sort of consideration. It shouldn't just be completely ignored.
Yeah, and this is true all over Europe and North America as well. We're into this schizophrenic stage, societal stage, where a fetus is a child if the woman wants it. A fetus is also a child if you kill a pregnant woman. That's a double homicide. But a fetus is not a child if the woman wants to kill it. I'm sorry, but this is a very schizophrenic stage, a very schizophrenic way of thinking, a framework of thinking.
Yeah, that basically implies that the fetus's life belongs to the woman. She can just choose to kill it, or if it's like a slave. If you kill another person's slave, then you have to compensate them for the value of your slave. But at least in some societies that had slavery, you were allowed to kill your own slaves if you so choose. That's basically the way fetuses are treated in the law today. And I mean, it makes sense on some sort of level because it's a sort of a life that depends on the woman's body. So I'm not sure if everyone would want to change the way the law works, but at least in sort of moral terms, I still think that abortion is usually morally wrong. It's something that should be avoided if at all possible. It should only be considered in extreme circumstances.
Yes, that's usually my position too. I mean, you can believe that abortion is murder, whilst at the same time thinking that laws the way they are framed in, let's say, El Salvador, where even if the mother's life is in jeopardy, abortion is still forbidden. You can still believe that legal frameworks such as those are extreme and rather unacceptable in a civilized society, whilst at the same time holding that abortion is generally wrong and generally murder. But the socialists, and again, this is not just a problem with this particular lawmaker, Laurence Rossignol, it's a problem with the entire base or a significant base of the Socialist Party of France, namely the feminist base in particular, who are pressuring him and his party to push this basically under blackmail. We will support the socialist nominee in the general elections if you do this. It's really that simple. Because let's not forget, there is the socialist primaries next month in France, and then the general both general elections in terms of legislative and the presidential elections are also due to take place just a few months from now. So they're using this as leverage because the Socialist Party is kind of in shambles these days. But the mentality that comes from that is pushed through the arguments for this bill is there and will continue to be there after the next elections, and it's going to be a mentality that will going to have to be challenged somehow. And if you make it illegal to even talk about it, how the hell do you change it?
Yeah, it's also just a really, really dangerous precedent to allow the government or some government agency to decide which information is so misleading or so offensive that it should just be banned. That's just really, really dangerous, because then you get all sorts of abuse, and it's just not possible to sort of objectively and sort of
Authoritatively.
it's impossible to have some sort of objective standards that are very verifiable from outside to determine what is true or false, because a lot of the times it's not. I mean, there are some statements where you can clearly say that they're clearly wrong, and some statements where you can say that they're clearly true. But there's a lot of sort of stuff that's in between where it's not quite certain, because either the actual because either there's disagreement between the actual scientists studying this sort of thing, or because the sort of formulation is vague enough that you can't exactly determine what the statement exactly means, because the natural languages are very vague and often imprecise. And if you allow a government agency to decide what is true or what is false, that leads to all sorts of problems.
Yeah, and it also can lead to lots of very well-intended innocent people being convicted, not just those that you somehow arbitrarily decided that they're so egregious that they must be fined and imprisoned and whatnot. And again, targeting information such as, look, abortion have negative physical impacts, there are women who regret it, and here's their harrowing testimonies and whatnot. I don't think that's necessarily manipulative. I agree that it can be persuasive, but then again, that's politics. You persuade people. You try your best arguments to persuade people. That's how we do politics, instead of fighting each other in wars. I mean, that wasn't that supposed to be the purpose of civilization?
Yeah, I mean, using the word manipulative sort of suggests that there's some sort of underhanded tactic going on, that they, I don't know, that maybe that they pretend to be in favor of abortion, but they're actually sneakily making arguments that undermine the case for abortion being legal or something like that. But that's not what they're doing. They're at least what it seems to me is that these websites just offer information that shows that
pro-abortion advocates don't. That's basically what they do. I've studied the IVG.net one, and yes, it does have a rather pro-life slant, but its position is that they don't necessarily hide it. I mean, in their about us section, they say our purpose is to convince as many women as possible not to abort. So it's not really that misleading. I mean, they don't say our purpose is to make abortion illegal. They say our purpose is to convince women not to abort.
Yeah,
and I think that's a very noble goal.
Yeah, and that is quite apparently what they're trying to do. And so it's not manipulative in the slightest.
Yeah,
because they say they want to do this and they try to do this, and where's the problem here? Where's the manipulation coming in? They're just trying to be persuasive, but it would be absurd to make a law that says that you can't be persuasive in making a particular kind of case. That would just completely undermine any sort of notion of free speech.
not only that, but it would ban politics itself. I mean, if persuasion is forbidden, then why are we in the business of politics? Let's just install an all-encompassing, all-knowing dictator, and we're done with it. If persuasion is illegal,
Yeah, it just need to go about finding that all-knowing dictator. That's going
yeah,
to be a
that's
more difficult
that's
task.
going to present quite a logistical problem for sure. Right, let's go to the next one.
Okay, the next one is from Germany. It's from Zeit, and it's an interview which is entitled "At Some Point, Their Strength is at an End." Violence against and disrespect of policewomen is a problem, says says the police union. Nevertheless, they are significantly less likely to be victims than their male colleagues. This is an interview with a spokeswoman of the police union. So the interviewer: Today is International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. So this aired on the 25th of November, or was published. Um, seeing how you as a representative for the police union are here to raise awareness for the situation, how bad are things for policewomen? Dagmar Hertz: Previously, we always used the 25th of November to put the focus on those who we protect. We provided information on domestic violence, forced marriage, and human trafficking. But the number of female officers who are insulted, cussed at, and spit at is rising. This is becoming a great burden. If those who are supposed to serve and protect do not receive any support, their strength is at an end at some point. How big is the problem? According to police statistics, about 11,000 female officers were affected. We're talking about resistance to police officers and assault, but also bodily injury. According to these statistics, 17.5% of the victims are female officers. How does it relate to the total number of women in the police force? There are probably about 30 to 35% women in the respective police forces of the various Bundesländer. But this means that women are less likely to be victims. That's right, but the numbers are rising. In the past, women were affected very rarely. They were protected by their femaleness. In the past, when we sent out a mixed patrol, we could assume that the woman would simply resolve any conflict verbally. Men were reluctant to attack a woman. Insults have always been present, but the frequency has increased massively, and it becomes burdensome. We have noticed that at demonstrations, some people specifically seek out the women in the police ranks to attack there. Skipping a bit here. Again, the interviewer: Doesn't this problem also affect policemen? Of course, they have always been affected more. Men are also insulted, spit at, and physically assaulted. With women, this is now reaching a new level. How come? I'm afraid we have a problem with people from Muslim countries, since these men are not familiar with women in uniform and do not respect them. Some female colleagues from the federal police working at the Frankfurt airport have reported that there are some passengers who refuse to even talk to them. They then have to call their male colleagues if they do not want to escalate the situation. Skipping another couple of paragraphs here. How can police women and men be better protected? The police union supports a new law which specifically penalizes violence against police, firefighters, and rescue workers. The penalty for assistance to law enforcement was already increased in 2011, with the maximum jail time going from 2 to 3 years. Did that help? No. But you have to look at this in detail. Currently, officers are only protected through this law when they are in the process of enforcing law. If they get attacked while they are only standing around in uniform, the law doesn't apply. This is why we need to widen the scope of the law. This would be a signal to police officers. However, it wouldn't solve the problem. To do that, people have to think about who the uniformed person standing opposite them is and why there is police in Germany. These people do their duty for all of society and try to ensure our safety. They deserve our appreciation.
Translation: Police women are starting to be treated a lot more equally than in the past. Am I wrong with this analysis?
Nope.
I mean, it just so seems like, oh, in the past, police women were somehow protected either because men were reluctant to attack police women or because their male colleagues would protect them more or whatever. But as of 2011 or whatever, in the last several years, police women are starting to get to feel the brunt of being a police officer a lot more equally with their male counterparts. Why aren't the feminists celebrating this? I mean, they shouldn't they? I mean, if the goal indeed is identical slash equal treatment of women and men in all areas of society and work and whatnot, then this should be counted as progress, shouldn't it?
Yeah, at least according to their standards.
Well, I'm holding them to their own standards. Now, I don't think this is a good news. Violence against the police is abhorrent and should obviously be curbed. But by their standards, this should be counted as progress, or at the very least, somehow of a progress. But then again,
Yeah.
I would assume that the left actually cares about blue lives, which they usually don't. But that's a different story. They generally tend to think that all cops are bastards. That's yeah. So anyway, but yeah, I mean, this should be counted as progress. Now, I had no idea that November 25th is the International Violence, whatever the day.
International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women.
Yeah, that one. I had no idea that there is another one, because there is another one on March 8th, and then there's another one somewhere in June. So how many of them are there really out there? So, but I don't know what to say. I mean, why aren't they celebrating? That's all I had to say. I mean, why don't you celebrate? This is a proof of equality. Maybe you don't like equality, and I can understand why you don't, but that's what you've been advocating for the last 40 years, or probably even more.
Yeah, it's though I actually have to give credit to the interviewer here,
Yes.
who was quite well informed and who immediately pointed out the problems in this narrative that so many women are assaulted. Immediately asked, well, what are the numbers for men, and how does this relate to this percentage to the percentage of women in the police force? And immediately realized that it actually means that women are significantly less likely to be assaulted.
Yeah, I was surprised about that too when you sent me the link last night. That oh my god, the interviewer is actually willing to ask the questions, which wasn't the case in the past, in the very recent past. But yeah, the interviewer definitely did a tremendous job. But nevertheless, I mean, and also credit, I guess, to the spokesperson of the police union, I think was right.
Yes.
Credit to her for the willingness to say, look, there is a problem with individuals from the Muslim community, because at the end of the day, it is true that all criminals, male and female, would definitely try, if they want to attack the police, they will try to attack where the police is the weakest. And whether that's triggering or not, that means you attack the female police officers. I mean, if you have 20 police officers guarding a building and 17 of them are men and 3 of them are women, the best shot is to try to attack first where the women are. It's not rocket science. It's just an increased likelihood of success. With that said, there is indeed a problem with the Muslim individuals, because they tend to be accustomed with a different standard of policing, and that is to say, there are no police women, police officers, female police officers, and they tend to respect them less. But then again, police does, in general, male or female, doesn't enjoy a high level of respectability in many societies.
Yeah. Also, this thing about increasing the penalties for assaulting law officers and so on. I don't think that's a good idea. There are already laws that make it make it more of a crime to assault, to insult, and so on police officers and other government officials. We don't need any more of that. Of course, police officers shouldn't be attacked, but then neither should anyone else. And it seems to me rather weird that we have these much greater protections for people whose job it is to deal with violent, dangerous people who are armed, who are trained at dealing with those situations. And we have lesser protections for just ordinary people who are not trained to deal with these situations.
Yes, and also in the interview, it is mentioned that the penalties for that have already been increased 5 years ago, and it didn't work. It didn't help in any way.
Yep.
So it would kind of be the definition of insanity to to do again the very thing that has already been tried and failed and didn't help in any way, shape, or form.
Yep.
This shows. I mean, those who did genuinely believe that increasing the penalties in the law would help anyone are the kind of people that can be found across the pond in the states arguing for more gun control. They don't seem to understand that if a criminal is willing to beat the crap out of a police officer, that criminal is very likely to not give a toss whether the penalty for doing that is 2 years and 6 months in jail or 2 years and 8 months in jail. I mean, it just doesn't matter. Just like in the cases of gun violence. I don't like the terminology gun violence, but whatever. If they're willing to get into a crowd and shoot a bunch of people, they don't really care that it is an extra crime to just have the gun to begin with. It is really that simple. And there used to be a time in the past where police officers in almost all European countries would seem to have a better understanding of how criminals think. Whereas these days, police officers and police forces tend to be used as social advocacy a lot more and a lot less about curbing crime.
Yeah. So basically, the idea is that also, so you've killed a bunch of people with a gun in a gun-free zone. So therefore, we're going to throw you in jail for forever, basically, and also give you a fine for carrying a gun illegally.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just madness.
So we sentence you to 300 years in jail and a $2,000 fine.
Yeah, no, and then force the family to pay for it, basically. Yeah. All right, let's go to the next one, and here comes the silly place. Coming from dagensmedia.se. Stockholm kan bli först i landet med förbud mot sexistisk reklam. I think the title is pretty much self-translatory. Stockholm can be the first town in the country to forbid sexist advertising. And goes like this. The political leadership in the city of Stockholm will begin work to develop ethical guidelines for advertising. It's remarkably well-written article, grammatically speaking. Earlier this autumn, the Swedish Women's Lobby conducted an audit which examined how gender discriminatory advertising in the Nordic Union looks like. The report showed that all countries need to work more actively against sexist advertising, but that Sweden is the worst in the classroom. That Sweden is the only Nordic country that has no regulations against sexist advertising. The matter may soon change, at least in the capital city, when the political leadership in Stockholm will begin working to develop ethical guidelines for advertising. It says so, amongst other things, written in the Traffic Board business description for the next year, which is expected to go through today, December the 8th. That would be yesterday. The initiative can make Stockholm the first in the country to ban sexist advertising. The guidelines would not apply, for example, to Storstockholm's Lokaltrafik subway and bus shelters belonging to the county council. However, they would apply to the sites that the city itself owns, such as advertising display, lampposts, and cultural boards. Malin Eriksson, who is the Feminist Initiative representative in the Traffic Committee, says to Dagens Media that the guidelines are needed to enable people to avoid having to face distorted ideals of especially women's bodies in their daily lives. The public space is a part of people's everyday lives and where you should not have sexualized messages imposed on them in trying to sell stuff with women's bodies. She also mentions a study from 2014, also conducted by the Swedish Women's Lobby, which showed that 9 out of 10 young women are affected by the sexist advertising and that it makes them feel bad about their bodies. It is very essential to be able to move freely around the world without ever having to set oneself against these ideals, continues Malin Eriksson. Just like the women's lobby, the feminist initiative believes that the industry's self-sanitizing agency, the advertising ombudsman, the reklamsombudsmannen, is not enough. I think it is quite clear that it is not enough. If it had been so, if it had been so, we would not have had to work out the guidelines for advertising. Sure, it is great that the advertising ombudsman exists. It certainly counteracts the worst of the advertising, but it takes more than that. Some oppose the idea that it is possible to define what constitutes sexist advertising. How can the guidelines be even developed? It is difficult for me to say at the moment. As a politician, I can only wish the way I want them to look like and then send the requests to the traffic office. Then there will be a proposal that the traffic tribunal may consider, but I am concerned about how such guidelines would end up looking like. What do you hope will be the impact of ethical guidelines for advertising? I hope that the effect will be that advertisers will simply stop trying to sell their goods and services using women's bodies. Since it is important to point out that there will be policies that consider that the advertising that is approved, it will be a matter left to the transport authority. There are those who are not so enthusiastic about the new policy at all. Politicians should not take the lead in these sorts of restrictions and on freedom of expression. We have other things to do, like make sure it is safe and clean and empty the bins, for example, said Cecilia Brink from the Moderate Party, opposition mayor and deputy chairman of the traffic committee for Dagens Nyheter. Trondheim, Norway's third largest city, has already decided not to rent out advertising space for photos that can lead to problems with their own body image for those who are forced to look at them. London has also banned sexist advertising in public transport. This kind of language, banning photos that can lead to problems with body image for those who are forced to look at them. I didn't know there is an epidemic of, fascist goons forcing pedestrians to look at all the advertising everywhere on the street. I had no idea that such problem even exists.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. Go ahead.
It's like that scene in Clockwork Orange where Alex is forced to watch these films with his eyes being propped open with the whatever you call them. Probably that's what's going on in Swedish streets. And apparently Cecilia Brink is the last voice of reason. Yeah, it would really be better if politicians focus on things like making sure that rubbish bins are empty, rather than coming up with this sort of nonsense.
Yeah, and in the case of the transport authority, the Stockholm's traffic, maybe they should also consider working closer with the police in some metro station. I would say, for instance, the Husby area, the northwest, I think, of the capital city, where the sexist advertising is probably the least amount of problem. The pickpocketer and the fact that you can get a very big beating if you're too white in that area. I think there are bigger issues too. And of course, the feminist snow plowing. I mean, again, this is Stockholm. There are quite a few significantly more important areas of policy to be solved or to be addressed in the Swedish capital rather than the sexist advertising, whatever that means. I mean, it seems to me that if there is a beautiful woman there, then that's a problem. that seems to me the definition under which these advocates are operating under, both the women's lobby and the feminist initiative, which, by the way, it's a political party in Sweden because it's Sweden.
Yeah.
Well, actually, they do exist in Norway too, but Norwegians are far more sensible. They never vote for them. But in Sweden, they actually do have a few local councillors and even a member of the European Parliament. I mean, Sweden is a very special place. But yeah, I mean, it just seems to me that and this is and again, this thing with sexist advertising, it doesn't seem to be necessarily a Swedish problem. If anything, Sweden is late to the party. It's London that they also mentioned in the Dagens Media article, but it's also Rome. If you remember in a previous show, maybe 2 months ago or something like that, we discussed that in Rome, and it almost always seemed to be the same kind of rhetoric. If there is a beautiful woman there, then that's definitely a problem. It's never a problem when it's a man, regardless of whether it's a very fit or beautiful man or an ugly man. It's never a problem if it's a man. And also if it's a relatively average or less than average, a very ugly woman, again, it's not necessarily a problem. It's only a problem if it's a beautiful woman, which is basically the exact kind of character that everyone appreciates, both women and men.
Yeah, and I would actually like to hear from the models who are actually earning money from these kinds of from these ads. Maybe they don't really appreciate how women are protected from sexism by by them losing their jobs. Maybe they might have a different opinion.
Yeah, for sure. A similar initiative almost a year ago, if you remember, that was discussed in Russia as well. But then again, in Russia, pretty much everyone was like, this is retarded. That's never going to happen. And there, actually, this argument was put forth. Look, there's a lot of rather poor girls who have a very nice body that make a lot of money by working in this industry. Why should this be banned? But then again, I presume this kind of argument would be considered hate speech if you put it forth in the Stockholm City Hall. I wouldn't be surprised if there would be even a law to punish you.
Yeah, probably that makes it even worse because these poor young women are being exploited for their body, and that's very degrading. And they should be grateful that these far-thinking feminists have liberated them from their oppressors, and now they should just join them in the proletarian revolution and overthrow the patriarchy and the capitalism, and then we're going to have a utopia where you don't actually have to work for a living, and then everything's going to be fine.
And until then, they should enjoy their perpetual poverty.
Yeah, I mean, you have to make some sacrifices.
Yeah, it is really amazing. And the next piece of news is also to the same tune. It just seems to me that feminists are extremely busy, and especially the far left feminists are extremely busy in making sure women stay poor, basically. Because again, especially in these cheap shot advertising billboards and whatnot, usually the models who work there are at the beginning of their career. They're usually poor. Those are usually the first big bucks that they win in their lifetimes. It's usually their shot to climb up the ladder of the industry. So all these kinds of forward-thinking feminists, as you put it, they just make sure that women stay poor. I mean, they should pretty much decide themselves. Do you want women to be independent on themselves or not? Because banning every industry where they can actually start climbing up the ladder actually makes sure that they don't become independent.
But then you see, that's brilliant, because then there's going to be more female victims, and that means that feminism has a stronger case to make.
Fair enough, I
because
guess.
you see, once women are successful and a lot of women earn a lot of money, then that whole wage gap starts diminishing, and it's going to be much more representation of women in all sorts of fields. That's, of course, a bad thing for feminism, because then they no longer have this victimhood status. So it's actually a good thing if they prevent it.
Yeah, fair enough. Although there's still mansplaining, and the mansplaining hotline, also a Stockholm initiative. I mean, you're underestimating their ability to find victimhood in everything. I mean, at this rate, probably in 10 years, we're going to find, probably also starting from Sweden, the National Stair Rape Act of 2025 or something like that. uh, their capacity to find new ways of being victimized is it seems quite endless. I mean, whenever you think you've seen full Sweden or full feminism, you just wait another week and there's going to be a new surprise for sure. Right. Let's go to the next one, which is also from Sweden. This is a recurring theme. It's a discussion that we also had probably 6 months ago or something like that. Coming from Sveriges Radio, the national taxpayer-funded radio station, the Christian Democrats are now open to the idea of punishing the buying of sex abroad. The government and the leftist party want to make it a criminal offense to buy sex abroad. If you remember, we discussed the piece of news at the time. Among other parties, the resistance has been great, but now the Christian Democrats are willing to vote in favor of a future proposal in this regard. We think, of course, that buying sex is unacceptable wherever it occurs. I think that criminalization of sex purchases abroad could be a way to discourage the buying of sex, whilst waiting for other countries to take Sweden's lead and pass a similar sex purchase law that we have, says Andreas Karlsson, the Christian Democrat group leader and legal policy spokesperson. In his first statement after the election, Prime Minister Stefan Löfven said that the purchase of sexual services abroad should be criminalized. The government's own investigators have been discouraged from making such a change in the law. The most important reason is that in most other countries, it is not forbidden to buy sex from adults. But Justice Minister Morgan Johansson said that the government intends to present a bill next year to the parliament in which Swedes who buy sex in other countries would be punished. I'll put this matter very closely to the larger issue of trafficking and sexual slavery. I see this as an effective instrument to reduce the phenomena. If you have that belief, then it is natural to move on to the parliament with it. But what do you think, the interviewer, what do you think that such a law would have in effect? I think it will have a deterrence effect. When Swedes go abroad, and some might have thought about buying sex, then they will know that there is an opportunity for the Swedish judicial system to actually intervene, even if this has occurred abroad. The leftist party has long been pushing for criminalizing the purchase of sex abroad, but the government needs the support of another political party in the parliament to push through with the proposal. And the question is, politically speaking, very controversial. The Sweden Democrats, the Center Party, the Liberals, and the Moderate Party, or the Conservatives, say no to such a ban. It is clear that we do not think about buying sex abroad. However, it is so that it respects the international law in various countries. If we begin to punish the Swedes in Sweden for anything they have done in a country where that is legal, then we are breaking this international practice. Then the great risk that is that the others will start pushing people for what they do, punishing people, for what they do in Sweden, but that is perfectly legal here, says the Justice Committee Chairman Beatrice Ask of the Moderate Party. But the Christian Democrats may therefore expect to go against the rest of the alliance and vote for the upcoming bill. Parliamentary group, however, are waiting for the final bill before issuing their final position, said the team leader Andreas Karlsson. The Christian Democrats parliamentary group decided to work for the idea that the sex purchase law shall apply even when offenders are on a holiday abroad. If Sweden now wants to be a role model in this area, I think this is an important legislative change, added Desiree Petrus, Christian Democrats' gender equality policy spokesperson. So, we might actually see it through. I mean, if the Christian Democrats mean it, there's still quite a lot of time for this to become law before the next elections. Mr. Gunnarsson?
Oh, sorry. Just when you thought that Sweden just had hit peak feminism, then there's never any peak feminism. It's just always always onwards and upwards.
Yeah, just as I was saying
Always more
earlier.
progress to be made.
Yeah, if you think you've seen peak Sweden, just wait for another week, and there's going to be a new surprise.
You know,
Uh,
it's
Go ahead.
probably the same thing as peak oil. It's been predicted for decades. It's still hasn't happened, and who knows?
It's very
I mean,
unlikely to ever happen. Go ahead.
at some point it's going to run out. I mean, that's just there's a finite amount of oil on Earth, just like there's a finite amount of feminist things you can do. So at some point it's going to run out just out of logical necessity. But um, yeah, it's just not looking like it's going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah. Now, if this thing, I mean, the lady from Beatrice Oscar from the Moderate Party, which is think of how cucked Sweden is. The Moderate Party is now the far right, the Conservative Party. Uh, so, so there's that. I mean, she has a point when she says, "Look, if we do this, then maybe others will start doing the same thing." And I wonder if the Swedish leftists, the leftist party, the Vänsterpartiet, and their cucked allies are willing to apply their own principle, I don't know, to gays who travel from Saudi Arabia to avoid being beheaded and they travel to Sweden. If they're willing to, I don't know, extradite those gays back to Saudi Arabia, if Saudi Arabia asks it, and say, look, they're committing a sin there that is illegal here. Or maybe women who travel from Ireland to Sweden to get an abortion. I'm seriously asking, are they willing to extend that principle? And I mean, if we are to break international standards, why not break it entirely?
Of course, they're not going to do that. It's not about principles. It's just about winning. It's just about which side you're on. And
Yeah,
as long as you're on the side of progress, then you can do whatever you want, as long as it's progressive. And if you're not, then it's wrong. The principles don't come into it.
yes, but from my cynical slash Machiavellian slash practical politics first perspective, I'm secretly rooting for them to actually implement this disdainful nonsense. Because, as I'm sure you know as well, and most of the people listening to us or watching, they also know, there is a serious disagreement amongst the right on, hard on progressive circles on the topic of prostitution. There is, on one side, the ones that say it's progressive to have legalized prostitution and whatnot. And then there is the hardline Saudi Arabia style feminists in Sweden who say that prostitution is haram basically and should be banned everywhere all the time for all the reasons and so on. I mean, there is a serious disagreement there, and if they manage to push this through, which they might not succeed, but if they succeed, um, there would it would deepen the differences between the two camps within the progressive movement. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a very good news, because the more fragmented they are, the easier they are to basically be defeated. I mean, I would love to see in the next Swedish elections a much wider support for the non-leftist sides, basically the moderate party and the Sweden Democrats.
Yep.
Because even in the last two articles, the only sane positions always came from the Sweden Democrats and the Moderate Party. So maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't be such a bad idea for the next government to be an alliance between the moderates and the quote unquote far right. Because again, the Sweden Democrats are as far right as, I don't know, maybe Theresa May, maybe. So they're really not that bad. So I don't know. If they manage to, but then again, even if they do manage to put it through, they will also become increasingly isolated as the progressive movement becomes
Uh-oh, sounds like we might have lost him there.
Yeah.
We'll see if he can get back here.
Yeah. I guess we'll just move on to the next piece then.
Yep, do what you gotta do. Looks like you popped offline as a matter. Oh, wait, no. You
What?
didn't.
I'm offline.
You're offline? Okay,
I
so,
can still hear you. Can you hear me?
yep. No, I'm talking about our secondary comms. So, yep, we'll wait for him to come back. Go ahead.
Okay. In the meantime, I will read the next piece, which is from Time magazine. Boys who sit still have a harder time learning to read, especially in the early years. Um, Wait a second, I'll post this link to chat. Uh, is especially in the early years. Anybody who has watched little boys for even 5 seconds knows that they are exhausting. At school, they tear around the playground, bolt through corridors, and ricochet off classroom walls. According to a new Finnish study, this is all helping them to be better at reading. The study, released on the 30th of November in the Journal of Medicine and Sports, found that the more time kids in grade 1 spent sitting and the less time they spent being physically active, the fewer gains they made in reading in the 2 following years. In first grade, a lot of sedentary time and no running around also had a negative impact on their ability to do maths. Among girls, sitting for a long time without moving much didn't seem to have any effect on their ability to learn. Researchers at the University of Eastern Finland analyzed studies that measured physical activity and sedentary time of 153 kids aged 6 to 8. The studies used a combined heart rate and movement sensor, and researchers uh, gave kids standardized tests in math and reading. Quote, we found that lower levels of moderate to vigorous physical activity, higher levels of sedentary time, and particularly their combination, were related to poorer reading skills in boys, the study says. While the test group was small and Scandinavian, the Finnish school system's freaky success is almost legendary. The study offers some evidence for what parents have been thinking for a long time. We may not be educating boys the right way. As pressure increases on schools to show evidence of learning, many education systems have tried to provide a more academically rich environment. But sometimes this has come at the cost of physical education, which is often considered an optional extra rather than one of the core skills a student must master. Money in school hours that might have been spent on PE are now devoted to libraries, science labs, and better tech gadgets. All of these are worthy teaching tools, but they promote a very sedentary style of learning. Add to this the reliance on testing, which again has its merits, and you have kids sitting down for longer and longer periods every day. Most US schools don't require any PE or recess. The connection between exercise and learning is not new, but the Finnish study provides strong objective evidence that the increased emphasis on sedentary academic activity among the youngest learners may be fruitless if it comes at the cost of physical activity. Boys whose days were more sedentary than when they were in the first grade, a crucial year for learning to read, made fewer gains in reading in the second and third grade. They also did worse at math for that year. The authors are unsure what the differences between boys and girls, why the differences between boys and girls are so stark. Not as many girls participate in the study, so that may have influenced results. Moreover, it may have less to do with the difference between male and female brains. For girls, academic achievement may be more influenced by factors such as parental educational support, peer acceptance, teachers' positive attitudes, and their own motivation. Um,
I'm back. I
you're back.
apologize for that. I told you I'm in the middle of fucking nowhere, so I was hoping that I can avoid such an episode.
Do
Yeah,
you
so
want
I don't
to?
know. I don't know where you lost me.
Yeah, I don't know if you had anything important to say about that last article, or if we should discuss
Well,
the
I did
timepiece.
say, but it doesn't really matter. I see you moved on. So yeah, let's discuss this one. They're surprised that boys need exercise. I mean, really? Why?
I mean that shouldn't be a surprise, but it's surprising that the results are that large, that significant. Um,
I,
it's also
my
surprising
experience.
that it didn't have any effect on girls.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised, and I might make a lived experience argument here, and I apologize for that, but it's the best argument that I have right now. But you know, it wasn't really that long ago. Oh, okay, there was actually quite a bit long ago. But when I was a pupil, it was always the case. Again, I grew up in an era where recess was uh, mandatory, basically. I mean, there was just no way you can have classes without recess. A teacher could be suspended for not allowing recess. And it was virtually always the case that all the boys would go out of the classroom and start running around and do whatever, and most of the girls would not. It's just the way it happened, and it happened all the way till the fourth grade when things became a little bit more balanced, when girls started also going out and whatnot. But in the first and second and third grade, that was the absolute norm. And you know, in the classroom that I was in, it was a classroom of 32 pupils. And was I think it was equal as 16 boys and 16 girls, or 17 girls and 15 boys, something like that. And it was always the case. I don't know if it's necessarily generalized, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were. And I also do remember I actually have a picture, a very old picture, black and white, because the commies wouldn't allow us colored pictures, with a recess in a different school from the same era when I was a pupil. And if you look at that picture, again, you're not going to spot any girl. Because in the morning there used to be the younger pupils till the fourth grade, and in the evening the older pupils. And in the older pupils from fifth grade till the eighth grade, that was the recess was a little bit more mixed, a little bit more equal. But in the younger generations, it wasn't. And I think that's quite. I mean, it just seemed very normal to me. I could be wrong, but that's how I think.
Yeah, sort of from my own experience in primary school, um, yeah, we boys did go outside in recess and play and so on. But as far as I remember, so did the girls. I mean, maybe they played different games and did different things, but they were still outside. They were still playing, and I don't recall any sort of great differences in that. Maybe it was a bit more active of the kind of games that the boys played, but I don't think it was some sort of really great difference. More for a difference of degrees. Uh, but I guess that's just very different in terms of what kind of groups you're looking at, and I think there's a lot of individual differences there.
Yeah, and there might also be a difference in culture. There is a lot more in common between Romania and Finland than between Finland and Germany. Finland is a very, very socially conservative country. Basically, when I'm in Finland, I'm like, well, this is basically Romania with a very difficult language, bloody difficult language, and significantly colder. That's how I view it. I mean, the churches look the same. The people react very similarly. They're slightly calmer, because I guess cold kind of tends to beat up calm in yourself. But otherwise, it is a lot more similar than it would seem at the first glance, even though the two countries have been in different political blocs between 45 and 1989. Nevertheless, the culture remained a lot more similar. So I guess there could be a cultural difference there. The way Finnish people think is remarkably different to the way French people or German people tend to think, and consequently, there is also a difference between the way they raise their children.
Yeah, that might be the case.
Because in my time, at least the girls used to consider that play is from when we go back home. Then they would go outside and play in the neighborhood and whatnot. But at school is not for playing. Whereas for us, for boys, it was like, are you kidding me? There's recess. Let's go and have some football. And
Yeah.
football was pretty much sort of mandatory. I mean, it didn't matter how good or awful you were at football. Everyone was playing football in every single recess. It was just the way it is. and sometimes you would have to remember the score from one recess to another, and the classes were just the things that between football halves. And it was just the way it was. I mean, that doesn't mean we weren't paying attention to classes, but we were paying significantly less attention than girls, and I think that kind of helped us. I mean, if we had been forced, I do remember there was once a week, I think, or 3 days in a row, where recess was sort of restricted because they were doing some modifications in a yard or something like that. Those were the most awful days in the entire school year. I mean, because we couldn't play football, we couldn't run around wherever we wanted, and it was horrible. That's why I still remember it to this very day. I don't remember exactly what they were doing, but I do remember that I couldn't run, which was awful. we perceived it as awful. So that's why these results don't surprise me. But I can see why these results are surprising, especially for an Anglophone audience, where these kinds of things are a lot more distant into the past. Because again, in the 50s, in the 60s, kids used to grow up exactly the way I grew up in late 80s, early 90s. No difference whatsoever. But since the 60s and 70s, they changed and we didn't. And nowadays, what seems normal to me, it only seems normal to Anglophones who are aged 50 or older, and not necessarily to much younger generations.
Yeah, and I mean, this is something that is just very important for also for teachers to keep in mind, especially if you're talking about primary school teachers. Even during classes, you can still do some sort of activities that that require your pupils to move, to stretch their legs, and do something physical, whether it's in between a lesson or it's even some sort of exercises where you can they can incorporate learning with moving around the classroom, and doing these kinds of things to sort of relieve the monotony of having to sit there for hours on end is quite important, especially when you're talking about young children.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that's been implemented lately in Japan, where for reasons of lack of space, much of the recess was either restricted or cancelled and whatnot in the last 15 or 20 years. And to replace that, they kind of did exactly what you described. I'm not sure how successful it was, but then again, the Japanese system is one of the most fucked up systems that you can imagine in the world, which is why they have that huge teenage suicide rate. But anyway, Japan is a book chapter in and of itself. But still, I don't understand, and this is probably a question for the audience, and I'll be checking out the comments. Why was this accepted by so widely, not just in the United States, but also in Britain? This idea that, recess is kind of optional, and as a result, most schools no longer require it and no longer grant it to their pupils. Why was this seen as acceptable to parents, first and foremost? Because I'm pretty sure kids aren't particularly happy about it, or even worse, now there are young adults who are raised not even knowing what recess is. I don't know. This is a serious question. I don't know. But why was this seen as acceptable?
I think it's sort of a serious case of false economy. It's sort of this idea of doing some sort of narrow profit and loss calculation, that the idea is we want children to learn, and therefore we're just going to cut extraneous things where children are not learning, and therefore we're going to be more efficient. And that's the sort of calculation that maybe makes sense if you're sitting in a university classroom somewhere and working this sort of stuff out on a blackboard, but you've never actually seen a school classroom from the inside in the last 20 years. But of course, in reality, these kinds of savings that you get by reducing recess, they're going to drastically cut down the actual rate at which your pupils learn the material. And it's sort of this sort of very narrow sort of economic thinking that that it just sort of looks at what are the variables that I can quantify and measure, and just exclude everything else. That is really a problem, and
so it was merely a matter of perceived efficiency, you think?
Yeah, I think that's the case, and I think that's really a sort of a really pernicious idea. It's not only because it makes teaching worse, but also because it gives economics a bad name. Because people sort of think that thinking in terms of economics means that you have to ignore everything that you can't measure, everything that is non-pecuniary, and I think that is a very unhealthy way of thinking.
Yeah, but then again, considering that there is increasing amount of evidence to the contrary, that is to say, look, recess is part of learning, and now we can better and better quantify it as time goes by and the more evidence is being collected. Should we expect a reversal of this, or it would have already become part of quote-unquote tradition and therefore a lot harder to change? I'm thinking here particularly to the countries that have gone full insane with this and banned recess, or at the very least allowed schools to slowly phase it out. I'm not really afraid for my own country. Here it's still mandatory, so it's very unlikely that it will ever be changed.
Yeah, I think we are likely to see it's be reversed there, because I mean the whole scientific evidence on that is rather overwhelming, and there's often sort of a lag between when science has figured something out and when it actually gets implemented in policy. So that it could still be a while, but I think eventually we're going to get there.
I see. Minjin says in the chat room, in Australia, recess and the afternoon break were mandatory. Or there still are. Half an hour between the first bell and lunch, and half an hour between lunch and closing bell. That's nice. Back in my days, it was 10 minutes for every 50 minutes of class, and after 2 classes, there was a 25-minute break, and then another class, and then 10 minutes between the next one and so on. And if it happened that it was a longer day, which never happened in the primary school, but it did happen during the gymnasium, there was another break also of 30 minutes, I think, or also 25 minutes, something like that. And I think it's still I think it's a very decent model. The brain tends to work better if you allow it constant breaks every other hour or every other 2 hours, especially for young children. Now, of course, we as adults can work for 9 hours without too much of a break, but not all adults can. Even adults need a break once in every 4 or 5 hours. I mean, it should be common sense. You don't even need significant scientific evidence. I mean, what now we're going to ask for citations because I say the grass tends to be green during summertime?
Yeah, but even for adults, it's actually is a better in terms of productivity to take more than just one lunch break in the whole day. But with smaller children, of course, taking breaks is much more important, and yeah, so there's really no excuse to get rid of recess, or to expect children to stay inside during recess and work on their homework or whatever. Yeah, actually, the sort of model that you talked about with the recess in Romanian schools is quite a bit more generous than what we have in Germany. In Germany, it's basically just so there's 2 45-minute periods, then there's 15-minute break, another 90 minutes, another 15-minute break.
15 or 50?
15.
Ah, okay.
And then basically if you have a school in the afternoon, there's then like an hour break between the morning and afternoon classes.
It is a lot more generous because the classes are shorter, just 45 minutes instead of 50. So that there's that. I mean, if I had been a pupil, I would have preferred the 45-minute classes instead of 50 because I hated classes. I still think to this very day that going to school was the biggest mistake of my life. Especially after the 8th grade. I mean, the first 8 years, I don't necessarily regret them, but after that, I do regret them. It was a total and utter waste of time. Every time there was a problem and the classes had to be shortened, even though they shortened the recess as well, but at least the classes were shorter, I would thoroughly enjoy it. Right, let's go to that allegedly misogynistic and dangerous place we talked about in the early of the show.
Okay, coming from our friends at The Guardian, India's rape problem is exaggerated, says Minister for Women. India's Minister for Women has been criticized for claiming that the country's rape and sexual violence problem is exaggerated by the media, driving away tourists. Maneka Gandhi, the Minister for Women and Child Development, told a workshop for female journalists that India ranks, quote, among the lowest 4 countries in the world for rape cases, according to a number of people in attendance. Replying to a question about government inaction on rape, the minister said, I went to Sweden 2 years ago when, because of the Nirbhaya incident, cases were being reported every day. The Times of India reported her as saying, referring to the Delhi gang rape, which focused international attention on India's rape crisis. Quote, someone said to me that no one wanted to travel to India. I had data with me and I took a look at it and then showed it to him. As per the data in the world, we ranked among the lowest 4 countries in terms of rape cases. Sweden was number 1. End quote. Gandhi claimed that the Indian media's supposed overemphasis on rape was driving away foreign tourists who were told that India is unsafe for women. She said, in those foreign countries, rape does not become big news as the newspapers don't report these cases like we do. We have zero tolerance towards rape, and our newspapers will write about it every day. According to a survey of global experts in 2012, India was voted the worst place in the world to be a woman, lower even than countries such as Saudi Arabia. Rape often goes unreported in the country. Women who come forward are frequently blamed for enticing attackers by wearing revealing clothing, drinking alcohol, or being outdoors after dark. Victims may also face a huge social stigma. Many are labeled unfit to marry or quote-unquote dirty after they have been attacked. Many women who report rape cases to police are turned away and pressured to not speak about it. Marital rape is not considered a crime. Sweden, on the other hand, has one of the widest definitions of rape and records every rape incident as a separate crime. So if a man rapes a woman 10 times, he faces 10 separate charges. In India, separate incidents are lumped together as one charge. Loveleen Tamani, a bureau chief at Himachal Dastak, who attended the workshop, said the minister's statements were inaccurate. Quote, in my state of Himachal Pradesh, there are countless rape cases. The minister seemed to be saying that rape is not such a big problem, but I don't really agree. It is an everyday matter. Perhaps it's true that the government isn't really doing anything about it, that there are so many reported cases still lying in files, and nothing has really been done. Senior ministers in the Prime Minister Narendra Modi Bharatiya Janata Party have made similar comments in the past. In 2014, the finance minister Arun Jaitley said that Delhi gang rape was a quote-unquote small incident that cost the country billions in tourist dollars. Others, such as the tourism minister Mahesh Sharma, have implied that foreign women share accountability in rape if they wear short skirts or reveal too much skin. Arifa Johari, a journalist of the news website Scroll, said it was time the Indian government started to take its rape problem seriously. Quote, as the Minister for Women and Child Development, Gandhi should know these reports. Should know how these reports are put together. She was trying to make it sound like India is not that bad, that we shouldn't think of it as a rape capital, but the basis on which she was making that claim was uninformed and silly. What does it matter where India stands on an international list? We have a toxic rape culture, and there's proof of it all over India. It is exhausting to see India's leaders, especially the Minister for Women, not wanting to talk about the root of the problem. The Ministry of Women and Child Development did not reply to the Guardian's request for comment.
Too bad. They should have replied to the Guardian's request for comment, and they should have issued one comment. Go fuck yourselves, pretentious idiots. Now, with that said, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I will say it, the truth is somewhere in the middle. And I can't believe I have to be moderate on this one, but, well, the truth is what it is.
You're losing your edge, Lucian.
Sorry?
You're losing your edge.
Yes, I'm losing my edge, but it is true that one of the reasons Sweden scores so high in terms of rape stats over the world. By the way, Sweden is not the worst country in the world; it's only the second worst. The worst is Lesotho, which is a tiny nation as an enclave in the middle of South Africa. But yes, Sweden does score worse than the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is a genuine rape culture, and as far as I'm concerned, the only rape culture, really rape culture. Lesotho scores that high because they had 1 year in which they had 3 more cases than in a usual year, and in a nation the size of Monaco, that tends to skew the stats. But yes, Sweden nevertheless scores very high, and part of that reason is indeed the fact that they have not one of the widest definitions of rape, but the absolute widest definition of rape from anyone in the world, really. And there are also incidents that are never considered rape in anywhere in the world, but that they are considered rape in Sweden, such as, for instance, having consensual sex without a condom, and then she goes to the police and says, well, I actually wanted a condom. That's considered rape under the Swedish law. Even though you're not contesting the consensual sex by itself, you're contesting the fact that he didn't wear a condom. So there are these kinds of issues that make that skew Swedish stats and make it a lot more of a rape capital than it actually is. Now, that's not to say that Sweden doesn't have unusually high number of rapes when compared even to its neighbors, Finland or Norway. But still, it scores a lot higher than it probably should because of these feminist-inspired definitions of rape, where basically everything is rape. There is that meme with a doctor coming in and say, "Look, I made a feminist robot," and the feminist robot screams rape nonstop, and the other doctor asks, "But why?" so that's the inspiration basically for Swedish laws on rape. So yes, it is true that Sweden scores a lot higher than it should because of that. Now, with that said, it is also true that perception of women's safety in India is significantly skewed towards negative side because of the media and not because of the actual reality. Now, sure, the Delhi gang rape case, which brought India into negative international spotlight, is a horrific case, and because there was footage of at least some of it, also made it a lot more convincing and whatnot. It was the perfect case for a feminist hysteria moment. But with that said, I have to agree with the insensitive minister saying that it was a minor incident, that it ended up costing the country billions in tourist revenue. I mean, at the end of the day, India is a country with a surface bigger than the European Union, and with the population 3.3 times higher than the European Union. The European Union is somewhere around 500 million inhabitants. India is 1.6 billion people, on a surface slightly bigger than the European Union. So in a population like that, as diverse as that, and as crowded as that is, I mean, let's face it, the idea that there are sometimes some cases like these is just, basic statistics. It's bound to happen. Now, sure, it's horrible because it happens, but uh, of course there will be more of them in terms of absolute numbers, whereas on a per capita basis the minister for women is correct. On a per capita basis there are really that often, but sure, in absolute numbers they do seem more of them, because there are more of them. I mean, I don't know how to explain this. If you have, let's say, theft, and you have a population of 1,000 people versus a population of 1,000,000 people, in the even if you take a 1% rate, in the 1,000 people population means 10 cases of theft, whereas in the 1,000,000 population means 100,000 cases of theft. So yeah,
10,000.
10,000. Sorry, yes, I was about to correct. Yeah, 10,000. So yes, there is more theft in the second population, but on a per capita basis, theft doesn't really happen a lot that often. So the same kind of applies to India as well.
Yeah. I would probably not believe the statistics that say that India is has the fourth lowest rate of rape.
That's probably more than that, but not really that much. I mean, versus the experts who think India is the worst place in the world to be a woman, I'm not buying
Yeah,
that for a
that's
second.
definitely nonsense. So yeah, as you said, the truth is probably somewhere in between.
Hmm.
And it's really funny that that it is the minister for women of all people who has to point this out.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, but then again, another aspect that probably a significant chunk of our audience don't know is that there have been a Donald Trump moment in India last year when there was general election. The Narendra Modi is basically the Donald Trump of India in many ways, or actually even more than that. He could reasonably be described as a man going his own way. He was he essentially, one of his platform when he ran was, it's time to end the feminist madness in our government. And slowly but surely he started implementing it. I mean, ever since he became prime minister, we've seen more justices from the Indian courts, including the Supreme Court, coming out against the misuse of the dowry law. Now the minister for women goes internationally and says, come on, stop with this nonsense. It's not really, it may be bad, but it's definitely not an international humanitarian tragedy, for crying out loud. And slowly but surely starting curbing the feminist influence within the Indian federal government. So there's that. I mean, that's one of the reasons why this has happened. And I don't know if I ever quoted this. There is a website called dnaindia.in, I think, or .org, which at one moment conducted a study on rape allegations that had DNA evidence submitted to them. And it concluded that in the Delhi area, which was considered until 2014 as the world capital of rape, actually something around 60% of the allegations of rape were, well, bullshit. So, these kinds of things have been slowly building up in India, and now probably what we're seeing is the crux of it, the moment when these things are starting to slowly be tied together, and the feminist hysteria slowly and surely be purged.
Yeah, let's hope that's actually going to be the case.
Well, it will, but then again, India is comparable to the United States. Basically, it's a federation of relatively autonomous states, and changing things from the bottom up to at the federal level takes years and years and years. It's not going to be a particular moment in time and say this is what changed it. No, it's all of these little things. It's the grand study that proves that there is a lot of lying about rape in Indian courts and whatnot. Then there is a justice in the Supreme Court saying, yes, there is a huge misuse of this particular law. Maybe it should be changed. Then there is this minister going into the Guardian and said, look, you're all full of shit. And all of these things are the little things that will slowly are slowly changing the narrative. It's also that fine lady Deepika, I can't remember her last name, who also basically made the documentary pretty much like the Red Pill, but for India. which is also touring right now across Asia, and next year will tour in Europe. I'm hoping that I'll be able to help her to get her movie in as many European theaters as possible. So it's these little things. One by one, they're changing things, and of course, it's going to take a while. But I do trust them. I mean, at the end of the day, the Indian MRA movement is much bigger than ours.
Yeah, and it is always sort of amusing to see the take of Western feminists on this issue, that where they have to sort of walk this very fine line that, of the one hand, condemning all these people as horrible, oppressive patriarchs, but on the other hand, they also have to recognize that they are people of color and that they are oppressed, and they are the victims of colonialism, and therefore can do no wrong. And it's always interesting to see these two intuitions clash, and it's always entertaining to read what they say about countries like India.
Yeah, from an intersectional progressive perspective, talking about India is a nightmare indeed. Thank goodness the men's rights movement is not progressive. Thank goodness we managed to keep progressivism away from this movement and let them have their own men's movement within feminism and apply the progressive bullshit. Thank goodness we kept progressivism away from our ranks. Because when we speak about India, we're like, look, these are the facts, and well, tough shit. Some things are true, some things are not. These are the facts. Whereas from a progressive standpoint, even if you're very, very well intended and try to present the truth, no matter how you do it, you're going to offend someone. You're either going to be a racist or a white cishet colonialist or whatever, or you're going to be a misogynist. Because if you're a progressive and you're aware of the facts that I just laid out, and many progressives are, you're going to have quite a hard time trying to present them to a progressive audience. Because how are you going to do it? Because you're going to have to eventually say that a significant minority of Indian women lie for shekels to the state, and this consequently get a lot of innocent men incarcerated. You're going to have to say it, and that comes off as misogynist in progressive circles.
Yep.
All right. We've been incredibly efficient. We have 23 minutes left, just enough to get to the final silly place. Coming from Aftonbladet.se, which is a Swedish tabloid.
Of course it's Swedish.
Of course it's Swedish. The car, a weapon in the hands of men. Dun, dun, dun. And goes like this. The car's capacity to injure and kill is tragically one of the reasons that the car of the modern era has so successfully managed to conquer the urban space. Violence is part of the car's practice and its condition for being able to dominate. We are taught as children that the car is dangerous. Then we spend our whole lives to be aware of cars. We all know how bad it can go. Planners have gone over decades developing traffic systems for minimizing the vehicle's mortality. The urban design is one of control and restriction of non-motorists' freedom of movement. Therefore, we have a system where pedestrians have to stick to sidewalks, then stop for traffic lights at every intersection. Pedestrians are forced into the underpass under roads. Bus travelers are delayed because of traffic jams. Children and cats can't stay at home because they're simply too fearless to be left alone in the traffic. Many people choose today not to ride because of fear of the car's violence. There is a legitimate fear. To live as pedestrians and cyclists is to live under the constant threat of violence. Motoring is the patriarchy's extended arm. The traffic's power relations explains the hierarchy between modes and how it interacts with other power structures such as gender and class. You can't believe how much time I spent to translate that sentence. It still doesn't make any sense. Anyway, back to the article. Quote, for example, men use cars 50% more than women in Sweden. The winners in today's traffic are the financially strong men. The losers are women, children, and low-income people. In our culture, there is an unfortunate pretense that the car brings virility and potency to its users. This unhealthy relationship between the male identity and the car needs to be broken. The collective approach to car ownership and use is far more sustainable. To move forward, we need to stop excusing the behavior of the car. We must stop calling the car's acts of violence, accidents. When accidents are a part of everyday life, we should call it practice. Motoring based on a force practice. If the car had been harmless, we would no longer have had to learn coping mechanisms and be aware of it. It would lose its primacy. In an urban environment, the car would be reduced to merely stupid and clumsy. As motoring is based on a practice of violence, the car space in towns should be severely restricted. Today, cars occupy about 70% of street width of standard blocks in a city. This is absurd. It is not acceptable for people without a car to live subordinate to those who have a car. Therefore, I have a concrete proposal to begin a modal shift for equality. The first step is what is called the Sharing the Same Street program. It's very simple. We decide to no longer allow cars in urban and residential environments, and where they are, they may not occupy more than half of the sidewalk. The street environment allows it to easily be done by either picking off a series of street parking or alternatively making the streets one way. The equal share of street will limit the accessibility of motorists, which is also part of the score. To quickly and easily be able to go everywhere by car is not a right. It is time to plan for traffic jams and parking shortages. All the space freed is full of potential and should get as many groups as possible to benefit. It allows for wider pavements, new trees and plantings, or place for children to play, generous and pleasant bike paths, and new park benches. The possibilities are many. The author is Lisa Doyrell, architect and an active member of the Women's Building Forum. Don't ask me why that thing exists, but it does, because it's Sweden. So, the cars are a tool of the patriarchy. I bet you didn't know that.
So
Or
how
did
did
you?
So how did you break your leg? Oh, I was involved in a car practice.
Amazing. I usually am the one that explains the mentality of a Swedish feminist because I've been studying it for many years and I can understand the thought process most of the time, but I have to admit I don't understand this one. How does one get from the reality of car accidents, which aren't really that many in Sweden? I mean, Sweden actually has a very low car accidents rate, even when compared to its neighbors and to most of Europe. But how do you get from that to an inherent connection between cars and male identity, and then where the fuck it is? And therefore, that's oppressive to low-income people, which aren't really the most of the victims of car accidents anyway. But that doesn't matter. And how do you get from that, and then to get to power structures? And what? How do you get to that?
Yeah, I didn't quite follow the logic there, if you want to call it that.
I spent almost an hour, and I want my hour back. But anyway, at least we get to poke fun at it. But I spent almost an hour trying to translate this article because this particular sentence simply doesn't make sense to me. The traffic's power relations explain the hierarchy between modes and how it interacts with other power structures such as gender and class. How do you get to that? And on the class aspect, maybe there is something to be said about the state's socialist policies, because whereas in the United States, every poor schmuck can afford a car, in Sweden, if you're not very rich, there is no way you can afford a car, not because the cars are expensive, but because they're made expensive purposefully by the state. So, and since, the state is feminist, maybe your problem with low-income people not having cars is with your own side and not with the patriarchy, whatever the patriarchy is.
Yeah, it's also this argument that that because because what is it, 2/3 of car drivers are men, that therefore this is somehow inherently beneficial to men and oppresses women. That just doesn't follow at all. Because I mean, a lot of the driving is done maybe not by women, but on behalf of women, at least partially. The husband who goes to work with a car to provide for his family is also providing for his wife. The truck driver who drives various goods from one place to another is also driving goods that are then bought by women and consumed by women.
And
That
since in Sweden most of the consumer decisions are made by women, and consumer spending, I would argue that women are the net beneficiaries of large cars, driven almost exclusively by men. Because again, truck drivers in Sweden are 97% men. So yeah.
I mean, that argument is like saying that that supermarkets are a part of the matriarchy, a way of how women oppress men, because most of the shopping is done by women, and therefore it's at the expense of men, and therefore men are horribly oppressed. But in reality, also, even though women do most of the shopping, they also shop for men, and yeah, they also.
Yeah, what you said earlier would be if the men's rights movement had been progressive. I mean, if the men's rights movement had been progressive, this would be a forefront argument, especially Swedish progressive. Thank goodness we're neither Swedes nor progressives, but especially progressives. But yeah, I mean, I really don't understand the thought process. No matter how I look at it, I just don't understand how can one reach between the fact that there's too many cars and to that to say that he explains some hierarchy that doesn't really exist, and because of that men are to blame, and therefore let's restrict cars and make everyone's lives worse off.
I mean, that there's sort of a point there that cars are indeed very dangerous. There is quite a number of the number of people killed by cars is actually quite high, and driving cars is very dangerous. Also, there's other sort of negative externalities to it. There's pollution caused by cars, for example. And yes, a lot of city planning is sort of designed around being convenient for cars. So we pay a heavy price for cars, but also cars provide really, really large benefits. The sort of mobility and independence provided by having a car is just unbelievable, and that's a huge luxury. And just looking at the costs of something and not looking at the benefits is just always a recipe for disaster. You have to look at both sides of the ledger.
Yeah, and to be fair, this is just the progressive feminist, or the Marxist feminist incarnation of the anti-car narrative. But let's face it, in Europe we have had, and we have been having, and we still have, and probably will continue to have at least for another 10 years until we finally get back to our senses. We have this building up narrative of the anti-car narrative. Except it usually came either from classical social democrats or liberal, no, not liberals, the classical social democrats and the eco-Marxists, as I like to call them, the green parties and all those awful, insane people, and other similar species of anti-capitalist degenerates. These were the usual suspects who would make anti-car arguments. Recently, for instance, I think in Paris, yes, in Paris, they implemented a policy that used to be the absolute norm in communist Romania. That is to say, in weekends, they would only allow either even numbered cars that had on their license plate, and then in the next weekend, the odd numbered plates. allegedly to curb pollution. As a result, and that only applies to certain areas of Paris. As a result, the roads that would go around those areas have become significantly more crowded than in the past, and the overall level of pollution has actually increased. But nevertheless, the Greens are extremely happy about this. And if you look in most cities of Europe, have at least one such policy that is essentially anti-car, and that if you look at the benefits of those policies, most of them aren't really noticeable or relevant.
Yeah, but I mean, in politics, it's not so much about what the actual results of a policy are. It's more about what it symbolizes and how it makes people feel. And if you can restrict, if you can restrict the way people can drive their cars, this makes environmentalists feel good, and that's why they're going to vote for proposals like that. Whether it actually works in reducing emissions, that's sort of a secondary. That's like nice to have, but it's not necessary.
Yes, I mean, I mean, we already have the eco-Marxists to deal with. Now we're going to bring feminists into the mix. Because I have a dick, I can't drive my car, or because I'm driving it, I'm oppressing poor people. I mean, really? And again, I'm not driving. But still, I mean, when I do, I would rather not be hated upon by an extra group already. I mean, that would be fantastic. Just saying. I mean, again, couldn't Swedish feminists be more concerned with, I don't know, snow plowing? Because again, this is from the country that has feminist snow plowing. As a result, nobody can use his or her car, regardless of one's sex.
Hey,
Because
maybe that was the plan all along.
yeah, that's very gender egalitarian. Nobody can use anything, neither the buses nor the cars, regardless of one's sex, because there's just too much bloody snow, because it has been cleaned in a feminist way. That is to say, in a highly inefficient way.
Yeah, it's just about the environment, though.
Yeah, well, the environment was definitely a lot more, how should I say, unhinged or unmitigated, because, well, most of the snow got to stay there for a lot longer period of time because because of the efficiency of the authorities.
Yeah, you know, because you actually have to ask the snow's permission before you can actually remove it.
Don't give them ideas. I wouldn't be terribly surprised to see an environmentalist group arguing like that. I mean, come on, there is already there was in Vice, I think there was an article about some enviro hippies who are talking about making love with nature and asking consent from nature. So there's really small steps to be had. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised 10 years from now to hear the Swedish Miljöpartiet de Gröna, the Green Party, arguing in these terms, as in, have you asked the consent of the snow before you removed it from the capital city? What a world we're living in. I mean, we're seriously considering. Amazing. So yeah, amazing. No, I don't know what to say. I mean, I tried thinking about this article when I was translating it. I was like, what the fuck am I doing? Why am I translating it? Why does this thing even exist? So yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. We finally managed to cover all of this. Too bad that I got interrupted whilst discussing the new initiative of the Christian Democrats in Sweden.
Yeah.
But yeah, considering the quality of internet that's available in this part of the country, otherwise it was pretty decent. So yeah, that was pretty much it that I had to say.
All right, I have one last thing to say, which is that you should all take the red pill.
Yep, take the red pill. See you all next week.